Congressman Rodney Davis takes back his vote for Donald Trump, and Governor Rasner still isn't talking about his vote in that race. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. Boy, it's an odd time in federal and state government, particularly with this presidential race, even though Illinois doesn't seem to be in play. Anyway, to talk about various aspects of this, we have back with us today Andy Maloney, State House Bureau Chief, Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. Thanks for coming back.
Always good to be here.
And ditto David Dahl, State House reporter for WTAX Radio in Springfield. Welcome, Dave.
Ditto yourself.
Thank you very much. Okay, we usually start off with the state, but you know, the people have been talking about this little thing called the presidential race, and Donald Trump it's been a little bit more than a week since he came out with about a week that he came out with the New York Times came out with a tape of him talking about how he perhaps treats women. He says he didn't do it, but then other women have come forward, and Trump doesn't like the New York Times anymore. Anyway, over last weekend, Congressman Rodney Davis of Taylorville, 13th Congressional District, who represents part of Springfield, came out and said that he was taking back what had become his endorsement of Donald Trump. In part, he said the abhorrent comments made by Donald Trump are inexcusable and go directly against what I've been doing in Washington to combat assaults on college campuses. The other part of Springfield is represented by Congressman Darren LaHood of Peoria, and he issued a statement saying I wholeheartedly reject these comments and have real difficulty explaining them to my wife, mother, or sisters. They are completely offensive and should be repudiated at every level. And as we tape this show, that's as far as Congressman LaHood has gone. Effect, Andy, what do you think?
Well, you guys could talk a little bit more about precedent in presidential elections than I can, but as far as...
You calling us old?
Yes,
okay.
I might have been implying that you've seen more elections than I have.
Correct, anyway.
But I certainly haven't seen anything like this in the elections I've been paying attention to. You have members of Congress sort of almost the expectation that they're going to run away from their party's nominee with under a month to go in the race. As you said, Congressman Davis pulled his support. We've got other members of the Illinois Republican congressional delegation still kind of waffling on that. I believe Peter Roskam supported Trump, kind of wavered on it, but then came back and said, well, I think Hillary Clinton would be worse. And you've got sort of these standing calls for them to keep doubling down on their comments as more and more information comes out about this.
And of course, United States Senator Mark Kirk, who's up for re-election, has been against Trump for a while now.
For a while, correct.
He's fell off, and he calls him names now. Dave?
Yes, Senator Kirk was in town this week touring the Stroke Simulation Center at the Memorial Center for Learning and Innovation. And he said that Trump is totally unfit, and that Kirk is proud of the fact that he was so early and so strong on Trump being a bad idea. And he said that there was a story in The Hill, the publication in Washington, that said, Kirk says, I told you so.
Yeah.
So he was kind of gloating a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because Mark Kirk, in Congress, before he went to the U.S. Senate, represented a North Shore district north of Chicago. And it's a pretty liberal area, or at least in part. So, he's also proud that he is pro-choice on abortion and pro-gay marriage, which are not necessarily parts of the Republican Party plank. And he's running against Tammy Duckworth, who is a Democrat, and then some people are mad at Mark Kirk, strong Republicans who are like platform Republicans, saying that he hasn't been with the party anyway. But it's interesting, when Rodney Davis came out with this, I read it in another publication, then I looked, but on Facebook he was getting really trashed by Trump supporters.
Yeah, and
it's a tough thing to do.
That's an interesting illustration, I think, as to why it's maybe so difficult for some of these people in elected office to actually go that step and say we're repudiating the candidate and the message as well. There is the sort of backlash to it. Things get pretty heated in a presidential race. So I think that was an illustration of why it might be so tough for some of them to do.
Right. Now, of course, there's a guy named Tim Schneider who's on the Cook County Board and from Bartlett, a suburb of Chicago, who is actually the chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, but Governor Bruce Rasner, who has been basically bankrolling Republican Party in this election cycle, has called himself the leader of the Republican Party and has said in the past that he will support the nominee of the party, but has never mentioned Trump. And when it became Trump, he has, in recent several weeks, never said who'll vote for. Davey did that again this week when he was at an event in Springfield.
That's true, giving him many opportunities to say something, and the governor did indeed say something, that sexual assault is wrong and that he is against it. But he is not going to talk about the nominee. And it's another example, Bernie and Andy, of how skilled Bruce Rasner is at staying on message. He knows that the cameras are on him all the time. He knows that if something slips, it's going to be in the opposition's camp immediately.
Well, and as a perfect illustration of that, he at one point in the past said, I will support our party's nominee. I think that's probably when he didn't know who it would be. And there's a new super PAC that has been started by State Senator Daniel Biss of Evanston, and it's called Leading Illinois for Tomorrow. They started an ad campaign, mostly in the Chicago area where Trump is particularly not popular, basically showing Trump saying controversial things and making fun of apparently making fun of the person with disabilities and stuff, and then showing 3 times or so pictures of Governor Rasner saying, I will support my party's nominee. When asked about that, that's when the governor again this week said, I've said all I'm going to say about the president's race, and I don't like sexual assault.
Yeah, and it's
but this is like the first time since the Rasner money has done all of this attacking House Speaker Michael Madigan as the Democratic bad guy. This is the first time I think, actually there have been some ads saying Governor Rasner and his policies are bad, particularly from unions, particularly the Service Employees International Union, which has sent out many mailings all over the state with pictures of Republican state reps next to the governor saying he's hurting programs. But this is a TV blast linking Rasner to Trump, and it's just interesting. He basically didn't say anything about it.
right. And versus, as you said, Rasner and allies linking Democrats in this state to Mike Madigan, that whole strategy sort of applied in reverse, only with the Republican Party's presidential nominee linking Republicans to Trump. I think they're pretty confident that that's going to be an effective counter message this election. As you said, Senator Dan Biss has been around for a little bit now, and he's a name that I think you'll hear quite a bit going forward, not just in the state Senate, but also he was initially looking at getting into the comptroller's race.
Right.
But I think even going forward, he's looking to kind of keep his name out there and keep looking to expand.
Well, he was
his
the
horizons.
mathematics professor at University of Chicago, which
Right.
isn't a bad thing to be, but he dropped out of that comptroller's primary to make way for Susana Mendoza, who seemed to be the party choice, and she's the city clerk of Chicago, and added various, kind of balanced out the ticket. She's a woman, she's Hispanic name, et cetera, and so the Democrat, and of course, that's really, other than U.S. Senate, that's the only statewide race because it's only for the second 2 years of the comptroller's term because of the unfortunate death of Judy Barton.
Boy, wasn't the governor mad about that when it wasn't a 4-year appointment.
Right, and the legislature changed that on him to make it go. Well, speaking of Madigan, the governor's favorite target and the Republican Party's favorite target in saying a lot in the state is wrong because of Mike Madigan, who has been speaker for more than 30 of the last 32 years or whatever. There's the Illinois Policy Action, which is an arm of the Illinois Policy Institute, promised to be putting out this 60-minute documentary, and there was a showing in Springfield this last week, and I guess it's going to be on some TV stations that they're probably buying time to put it on.
Yeah, it'll be an infomercial.
It will indeed. Well, Dave, I was not able to see it, but you were, and how would you? What's the Dave Dahl review?
Oh boy, I covered the story. I was there Wednesday night at the Legacy Theater on Lawrence. If you haven't been to the Legacy, they've got some good things there.
It's the old Springfield Theater Center.
It's the movie, and I'm referring to it as a movie, not a documentary. I don't know why, but It reminded me a little bit of Roger and Me. It was entertaining. I thought, from a creative standpoint, it was pretty well done.
Yeah, Roger and Me, of course, was the
Michael Moore,
liberal guy attacking the head of GM at the time,
Right,
who actually
Roger
spoke
Smith.
at my graduation at University of Illinois in 1976. But anyway,
It all comes around. And was Kevin Bacon there? That's all we're missing. I thought it was creatively done. I thought it was humorous. One thing that stood out to me was the reliance on certain people who were the interview guests. One was Jason Gonzalez. I'm not sure a lot of people give him much credibility. And someone we haven't heard from in a long time, Steve Rauschenberger.
yeah, okay. Rauschenberger, of course, former state senator from Elgin, Republican. And Jason Gonzalez ran against Mike Madigan.
That's correct, yeah.
For his House seat, and that didn't happen.
Right. So they relied on those two gentlemen. And of course, Rich Miller was in it quite a bit. John Cass was only in a little. Scott Stantis, who really has only been around here for a few years.
Right. So Cass is a Tribune
he's a columnist
columnist
with the Tribune,
and
Stantis
is a cartoonist. And the
The
editorial
Tribune.
page of the Tribune has been quite anti-Madigan.
Yes, and as I said, I'm not sure Stantis has been around long enough to provide the weight that is needed for that, but that was not a problem for the people putting together the movie. And another thing that I kind of wonder is, are people going to go to the movie or watch the movie, and I'm sure it's going to be on the YouTube and on michaelmadigan.com, and either learn something they didn't know before and then go do something about it, or will it be like the cheerleaders speaking to the choir and confirm their belief system?
Yeah, well, there could be some of that.
Yeah,
Andy.
I think that's a great point about people actually being saturated with this message. They've said they're going to air it on local TV stations. It'll be on the internet as well, most likely. So you wonder exactly if people are going to act on that, or maybe if they're just going to see it passively, or even if they're going to see it. It's emblematic, I think, of just how campaigns are run these days, a little bit with sort of the creative new media message. It's not just TV ads and flyers.
Every platform you can find, including the old Springfield Theater Center,
Right,
apparently.
right. We're making movies too. So.
Yeah, and I should mention, Dave, you mentioned Rich Miller, who runs the Capital Facts newsletter and blog in Springfield, very popular among everybody who watches politics around Springfield and beyond. And he had said that when he was interviewed for this, he was upset because he didn't realize that the Illinois Policy Action, or an arm of the Illinois Policy Institute, was behind it. And then a spokeswoman for that organization said, well, we told him everything and he signed a waiver. But then the lady from Texas who had sent the crew said, well, the crew didn't know who was funding it, so they couldn't have told Rich Miller. So he felt vindicated in saying that he felt duped, was the way he headlined it in his blog.
Same with the cartoonist Stantis. This movie is as good or as bad as you want it to be. As I said, I thought it was entertaining. There were some things in it that made me laugh. There was at least one thing I think they left out, and they also misspelled Kedzie on their district map.
They haven't been in Chicago very, very recently, is that right?
K-E-D-Z-I.
It's understood.
Without the
So
E.
whatever.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's talk a little bit of, a policy, but there's another thing that's on the ballot, known as kind of the lockbox. There's a constitutional amendment coming up on the November 8th ballot, and of course people are seeing it as they vote early as well, that would say transportation taxes, like your gasoline tax, must go to transportation projects. And then there are some people, including State Representative Elaine Neckritz from Northbrook, a Democrat, big into budget matters, saying you don't want to do that because you don't want to constrain our use of state dollars in emergencies that much. And then Charlie Wheeler, who sometimes is on this show and who writes for Illinois Issues magazine, now part of NPR Illinois, has said that there could be unintended consequences, like even the money that goes to special funds like veterans on license plates. Well, if that's a license plate fee, maybe the Supreme Court of Illinois would say, well, you can't spend it on anything special. It has to go to roads because it's license plates. Anyway, Andy, where are we in that? And it looks from polls like it's going to pass anyway.
It sounds, I think it's easy for people to think that sounds pretty good. If you've got money that's nominally dedicated to transportation and road construction, why not spend it on that purpose? It flew through the legislature. I believe it was only 4 opposition votes in the House, and without any opposition in the Senate. And if you look at, as you referenced, any polling, the Paul Simon Institute found that I think of likely voters, 80%.
That's pretty high.
Said they were going to vote it. It needs.
Do you want your transportation tax money to go to transportation?
Right.
When it's
exactly.
worded that way, even though it's complicated, it looks like an easy answer.
It sounds good. And but as you mentioned, Representative Necritz and 3 other Democrats, I believe, have written this editorial saying basically, we don't want to lock in funding this way. We need some flexibility in the budget making process. What good is the new road that goes by the school if you can't keep the school open, just as one sort of anecdotal example. And like you said, friend of the show, frequent panelist Charlie Wheeler also highlighted some of those concerns as well. So it does need a 3/5 or 60% of people
voting
on the question, or a majority of everyone who casts a ballot. So it does need kind of this high threshold, or to get over this high threshold. But as you said, it seems to be exceedingly popular.
This is not California with so many voter initiatives on every election ballot. The Constitution seems to be an organic, ever-changing living document. In Illinois, should the Constitution be dictating a certain line item? Should it come to that? That'd be an argument against.
Right.
And they call it the Safe Roads Amendment.
Yeah, of course. One reason, as Andy noted, it got overwhelmingly support in the legislature. Perhaps that's because the State Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO are all for it. So everybody's favorite constituency is for it.
It's a pretty
on
easy
both
heuristic
sides,
to use,
because
right,
road builders and people who work on the road projects, everybody wants to make sure they have the money and avoid diversions. So we'll see what happens. On another issue of kind of money and actual state programs, I know, Dave, you were at the governor's event this last week in Springfield, where they talked about applying for a federal Medicaid waiver. It would, they say, allow, I think over 5 years, $2.7 billion to go towards mental health programs that could divert people out of county jail. Say it could cost the state a little less and be revenue neutral to the feds if they get approval from the feds.
It's a way to leverage some more money into the system. And the thing that struck me at that event was it was hugely positive. And that's the Bruce Rauner that maybe we ought to see more often.
Well, that's right. And there are Democrats and Republicans who are for this, because a lot of people support mental health programs, some of which have undergone cuts as the budget problem has occurred.
You've got to be sensitive to the needs of the mental health, and now the correct term to say, I'm of the understanding, behavioral health. Something's got to happen to these people. Someone's got to take care of them. When I was in Peoria, they shut down the Zeller Mental Health Center that was under Governor Ryan, and then the downtown transient population grew. And I think the governor deserves a lot of credit, not only for trying to take care of the least of us in this fashion, but also trying to redo criminal justice.
Yeah,
there are a lot of people in prison who are nonviolent offenders for whom prison may not be the correct remedy, and I think it's difficult because people who are in prison are really not a sympathetic population.
Yeah, Andy, it has had both sides come together. Kwame Raoul, state senator from Chicago, policing reform and those things. Those are among things I'm sure that you cover pretty closely for the Law Bulletin.
Correct.
Illinois has made some strides.
Yeah, sure.
Police body cameras and all of that.
Police body cameras. Obviously, we had some bills introduced during the most recent session that made, for instance, marijuana possession, low amounts of marijuana possession, basically a civil penalty. You pay the fine, and it's sort of like a traffic ticket. Mm-hmm. You have other reforms like that. I think one of the takeaways from the folks who do criminal justice reform very frequently has been, this is good stuff so far, this is the right type of path, but we're still waiting to see if he can do the dramatic things that it'll take to get the prison population down to where he says his goal is, 25% over the next decade. Yeah. That's what the folks in the criminal justice world have kind of taken, but it's true, he's brought sort of that tricky faction together in terms of not only Democrats and Republicans, but prosecutors and different stakeholders on the other side as well.
Now, if we could only use this model to try to fashion a budget, but there still seem to be pretty wide margins on, and let's talk about it. I mean, the governor and everybody's waiting for the election now to see, well, can anything in the legislature change? The legislature, which, by the way, is overwhelmingly Democratic, so that Bruce Rasner, who says he will not raise taxes or agree to any tax increase without reforms, which are part of his turnaround agenda, some of which might include eroding collective bargaining rights or prevailing wage at the local level, whereas Democrats say
limits in 10 years.
Term limits,
In
remap
10
reform,
years.
which won't take effect for some period of time, but he wants those on the ballot, which, of course, if on the ballot in 2018, would help him run for re-election on that issue, so the Democrats may not give it to him, even just for that. But but he'll still be the governor, and the Democrats are still saying those changes he wants hurt the middle class, in their opinion. Is much going to change after the November election as far as state budgeting? Are we going to get out of just a temporary budget and pass anything real? Just a reality check. What do you guys think?
It's difficult for me to see exactly how that kind of plays out. The stopgap budget, as you insinuated there, was intended to go beyond the election, and hopefully by then we have, for instance, some clarity in the House as to whether the Democrats still have their supermajority. Obviously, the governor is trying very hard to counter that during the elections, but it's hard to say that things will be less contentious going forward, because as the last 2 years have shown, and especially immediately in the wake of a very contested election where Mike Madigan is the issue and the Democrats are tying Governor Rauner to Trump and Republicans to Trump and everything, I think it's still going to be hard to compromise.
Agreed.
We'll see. Paul Simon Public Policy Institute down at Southern Illinois University, we talked about that. They continue to roll out results of a poll that they took one recent week, and it's kind of interesting. One of their poll results was that 47% of people said they would leave Illinois if they could, but 80% are unlikely to do so because it's like hard to move. 84% said that the state was going in the wrong direction. And as far as those who thought they wanted to leave, 27% said because of taxes, 15% because of government, 13% jobs and education. Andy, I guess that just confirms that people are unhappy. On the other hand, people are told a lot about what's wrong with Illinois, including by the governor, who has made that kind of his standing speech that we're the most terrible state.
Right, and
for business.
And don't forget, one reason stated for wanting to leave was also the weather, which is going to be a difficult problem to correct.
Did I not include weather? There was
you may
weather
have said it.
No,
You
I
may have
didn't.
said
I think
it.
I forgot to put it down.
There was a certain margin
Winter?
that said weather.
Correct.
But it's election season, so I think people feel a little gloomier even than normal about their government, even as their trust in government has eroded for a long time, I think. I think there's a certain level of catharsis almost during election season where people really want to send a message, not just voting directly for and against certain politicians that they like, but just as a general kind of referendum on we're pretty angry we're pretty angry about the state of things in this state. And then I think for Illinoisans, there might be a small subset who also kind of, I don't want to say relish, but I mean, they know that Illinois is known for the political dysfunction, and so they don't mind kind of playing into that and making that the thing that we're known for.
So you're
nationally.
making excuses for our bad numbers, is that what it is?
I'm simply postulating, I think.
That's right.
One big dysfunctional family.
Yeah. Well, I should notice it wasn't that big a story in Central Illinois, but it would have been a giant story had it happened. There was a strike date that Chicago teachers might have gone on strike this last Monday, a week ago, and they ended up like right around midnight of that Sunday settling. So, I mean, the governor had, trash talked the Chicago Teachers Union for a long time, and Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago had to find some extra money. I think it was from tax increment financing funds that he could, fill some gaps with, and so there is no teacher strike, and that's almost 400,000 students up there. So that would have been a big deal in the state that we've averted this time. Another thing that happened back at the presidential debate that happened at Washington University in St. Louis, Dick Durbin, the member of the U.S. Senate, Democrat from Illinois, was at the debate. He's a supporter of Hillary Clinton, and he ended up sitting in a section at that town hall-style debate right behind four women, including Paula Jones, who were the Bill Clinton accusers that Donald Trump had there. And I know, Dave, you were there when Senator Durbin was describing Rudy Giuliani leading these people, and he didn't exactly know who they were. He thought they were Rudy Giuliani's family, just an odd situation.
It was funny, and Durbin was in the second row, and he described Giuliani as a sober, somber usher. serious. And someone near Senator Durbin had a smartphone or whatever and looked up the story of the news conference that had happened just an hour or so before. And by golly, that's it, Bill Clinton's girlfriends.
And he didn't, yeah, and I guess they were he heard them exclaiming a little bit about, complaining about the questioners at the debate or whatever, but out and go, kind of interesting. And then there was a guy at the debate in a red sweater who became like an internet sensation, a guy named Ken Bone from Southern Illinois. I think he's originally from Granite City, and one report said he lives in Shiloh, and he works at Prairie State Generating Company. And he asked about energy policy, and all of a sudden he's on all the evening shows because he seems like a nice guy wearing a red sweater.
As if 2016 wasn't already strange enough. Now it's a celebrity in a red sweater.
It is indeed. It has been a particularly nasty campaign in state rep races. One of them is the one between Mike Mathis of Gillespie versus Avery Bourne, also of the Macoupin County area. And some of the Democratic Party flyers against Avery Bourne have talked about how she'll hurt Social Security or Medicare, which are both federal programs, and some of them against Mike Mathis have said that, well, he supported an organization that helped support a child abuser, which is really talking about the Democratic Party, which he is a member of that party, having given money to Keith Farnham, who's a former state representative who had to quit over child porn problems. And Mike Mathis said, I don't even know the guy. And these are the kinds of things that are happening in the mailings to people. Should people just not believe what they get in their mailbox these days?
Short answer, no.
Yeah. I guess we don't have a great answer for this.
Yeah.
But they do it because it works.
They do indeed. There's also, and that's, I would like to say, as someone who has long said that we should be more civil and more honest and more open, it would be nice if everybody could basically just be more truthful in their attacks. But we'll see how that goes because I know it's not easy. I will also say WikiLeaks, one last thing. It turns out, and I read this, I guess the Sun-Times, Lynn Sweet, the great reporter there, used to be in Springfield, did a story that the Hillary-Rodham Clinton campaign wanted Illinois and sought Illinois Democrats to try to move our primary later than March because they wanted to make sure that Illinois didn't go for a moderate candidate. I think they were hoping for Donald Trump. Illinois didn't change, and we got what we got. But as of the last week, Hillary Clinton probably is pretty happy Donald Trump is the candidate against her, but we'll see how it goes. With that, Andy Maloney, Dave Dahl, thanks for joining me. It's getting close to election. We'll be there soon. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.